What if you were told that your children would be high risk for developing a certain disease or disability? For example, sickle cell anemia, a chronic genetic condition that affects hundreds of thousands of people in the United States, causing lifelong pain and eventual organ damage. Not to mention HIV, cancer, deafness, blindness, and so many more of these chronic diseases and disabilities that make up the Pandora's box of your child's future. Now, what if you knew there was a way to protect your child from these diseases and disabilities before they were even born? Genetic engineering may be able to do just that. But how does one reckon the benefits of a healthy future for our children with technology that may challenge our fundamental core values and belief systems? Technology that presents an extremely costly and arduous process and that may not work in the end. Would you be willing to take full responsibility for deciding the genetic makeup of your child without a 100% guarantee that it will actually be for the best? Is it for you to decide, or some higher power, depending on what you believe? Previously banned in countries across the world, genetic engineering is now taking the forefront in scientific testing as new technologies develop. This new process of genetic engineering using the CRISPR model first began in 2015 in China.
Past summer, Chinese researchers led by oncologist Lu Yu of Sichuan University in Chengdu received approval to begin trials with the new procedure. U.S. researchers have gotten clearance to begin similar clinical trials in what some experts predict will be a technological race between China and America to make advances in genetic engineering.
The discovery of the CRISPR-Cas9 system was revolutionary in the general field of genetic study, but especially in the field of embryonic genetic engineering. The system allowed researchers in the United States to advance the technology we already have to target the modification of genetic material in the human embryos.
The CRISPR-Cas9 system has an amazing ability to recognize a particular DNA sequence in a cell that may be malfunctioning and then disable it by cutting the DNA. We call this gene editing, and we can use it to disable or repair a mutated part of the gene, which may be causing disease.
Headlines reported on nightly news and other news sources covered the progress of scientists within this field of study. The scientists will continue to see increases in funding and could possibly even be credited with saving the human race through genetic modification. However, one thing they will have to worry about is the backlash from the many communities against this practice. The continuation of testing could possibly result in harming their reputation within some societal communities. What will this research mean for those communities possibly affected? Technology that allows for parents to screen embryos in order to find out whether or not their child will inherit a certain genetic condition continues to advance. Genetic engineering allows parents to know whether or not they must prepare for life with a deaf child. For some parents, this technology can be very helpful, and they choose to find out whether or not their child will be deaf before the child is born. Others would rather not know. In a study conducted by researchers at the University of California, 85% of hearing families with a deaf child would have allowed genetic testing for deafness so that they can know before their child was born that he or she was deaf. When deaf families with deaf children were asked, only 62% said that they would have allowed it. Within the deaf community, many parents would rather their children be deaf so that they too can experience and integrate themselves into the dynamic and proud deaf community. Many people see being deaf a birthright into being a member of the deaf community. In addition to this, almost 70 million people consider sign language their native language. This way of speaking, specifically for those without hearing, has provided a way for those hard of hearing to communicate with each other or with those that can hear. It has provided a way for infants to express their wants and needs to their parents, and so much more. If embryonic genetic engineering becomes a popular scientific procedure, this could mean the end of sign language and the end of the proud deaf community, as scientists could genetically engineer embryos so that the child is not deaf. Is that something we are willing to give up? Is this truly a disability that needs to be eradicated like we would a disease? Or if we did so, would it cause more harm to the community as a whole?
Ensuring that our children have the best possible future is something we all want. Genetically engineering human embryos is one way to do this. No one would argue against doing whatever we can in our power to create a future in which these devastating diseases and disabilities are no longer present in our society.
As we find cures for some diseases, we are attacked by new and more virulent forms of disease-causing agents or pathogens. Although some of the symptoms of these diseases can be improved by taking drugs, genetic disorders cannot be cured unless the defective gene is replaced. In 1990, a 4-year-old with a genetic defect called severe combined immunodeficiency, or bubble boy disease, was first successfully treated at the National Institutes of Health by editing his genes. Genetic modification has achieved several other successes, including the correction of rare genetic abnormalities that cause recurrent genetic disorders.
Yet, despite these possibilities, there are certain variables that make it difficult for some to view genetic engineering as a viable pathway to ensuring a future free of genetic disorders.
There's no doubt that people often fear the unknown, and the ultimate effects of gene editing are ultimately not known. Long-term success cannot be 100% guaranteed since the field of gene editing is so new, and there's just not enough lab research to ensure the success of every trial. But even knowing this, many Americans still have mixed emotions about genetically engineering human embryos, especially amongst the parents. According to a Pew Research Center survey on genetic engineering, 2/3, or 68% of Americans are either very or somewhat worried about the prospect of genetic engineering, compared to the other 49% who say they are either very or somewhat enthusiastic about the prospect of new genetic technology. Within the same research project, published in July of 2016, only 39% of parents were in favor of genetically modifying their child before he or she was born, while 53% of adults who did not have children were in favor of embryonic genetic modification. Robert Blendon, professor of health policy and political analysis at Harvard Chan School, says, "They're not against scientists trying to improve genome editing technologies. People are concerned about editing the genes of those who are yet unborn. The majority, however, wants government regulators to approve gene therapy to treat diseases in children and adults."
We want our future children to grow up in a world where everybody has access to the medical care that can help them evade dangerous diseases or cure and treat those that already exist.
As we begin to see the early stages of the genetic editing technologies and processes, the question arises, how much will it cost? According to a Business Insider report, the process of genetically modifying human embryos will be relatively cheap. The development of the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool is relatively simple for doctors to use, and therefore it will be made inexpensive for families. It is projected to cost around only $2,000. This is great news for middle-class or even low-income families hoping to begin their own families. However, the true source of the money comes from the other in vitro fertilization, or IVF technology, that is required in order to use Cas9 for gene editing. IVF involves creating a human embryo within a lab using the egg and sperm from the parents. For this reason, gene editing must also be done in the lab and cannot be done with the baby in the womb. On average, the IVF process costs about $12,000. This is where potential problems lie. Will this high cost create more problems than fix them?
Clearly, there is no such thing as a right answer when dealing with any new technology, as it truly is a delicate balancing act between weighing out the immense hope that the technology provides and the difficulties that make that dream hard to turn into a reality. The genetic engineering of human embryos has the power to change many lives, both potentially for the best and the worst. That being said, if we strive to keep our responsibility to ensure a safe and healthy future for the next generation at the forefront of all our decision making, we can be sure that whether or not we decide to pursue further advancements in the field of genetic engineering on human embryos, that decision will be made with the utmost sincerity and respect for the ones it affects. In that case, we have succeeded either way.